Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG Show for Friday, December the 4th, 2020. I thought I would give you an update on my situation to begin with. I heard today that there's been an offer for this condo that has been accepted. That is dependent upon the financing closing, I suppose. And it also is dependent upon my father's will being probated. It's my understanding that property cannot change hands until the will is probated. But it would appear likely that I have to be out of this place by the end of the month. Where I'm going to, I know not. But I will keep you updated. I want to talk about the American presidential election. And let's go to Drudge and see whether he has anything about the extraordinary video that was released yesterday about counting votes in Georgia. No, there isn't. Nothing. How about the New York Times? The New York Times have anything about this? Let's check their homepage. Because we've heard, election fraud. Oh, definitely minor, No, there is nothing. Nothing on the New York Times homepage about the extraordinary story from Georgia. And what is that story? This is from Jim Hoft at Gateway Pundit. Earlier today, that would be yesterday, Christina Lila reported on the explosive video that was revealed during the Georgia ballot counting at the State Farm Arena, where crooked Democrats pulled out suitcases full of ballots and began counting those ballots without election monitors in the room. Trump's legal team showed a video from the State Farm Arena Tabulation Center when poll workers were told to leave at 10:25 p.m. A few workers stayed behind and were seen pulling suitcases full of ballots out from under tables to be tabulated. This was the most explosive video of the entire campaign season. We have now identified one of these criminals who were caught on video counting illegal ballots from a suitcase stashed under a table. As you can see from the video, one woman in a purple top was filmed helping pull out the ballots and then sitting down to count the ballots. That woman has now been identified. Local 11 News covered the story from the State Farm Arena that a pipe had burst. This was later proven to be a complete fraud and an excuse to kick out the GOP election observers. The woman in the purple made a mistake and left her purse on the desk advertising her business, as does the t-shirt that she was wearing. Her name is Ruby Freeman. She made the mistake of advertising her purse on the desk the same night she was involved in voter fraud on a massive scale. Her t-shirt says Lady Ruby and her purse says La Ruby, which is her company. This was not a very smart move. Her company is called La Ruby's Unique Treasures. It's on her LinkedIn page. Ruby's purse was a hit, and several fans wrote her on her LinkedIn page after they saw her and her purse on TV. They then commented on her LinkedIn page. Ruby was wearing a different shirt, but had the same purse by her side. Maybe the Georgia Police or Bill Barr's Department of Justice may want to pay Ruby Freeman a visit. How is it possible that election workers in the state of Georgia have been proved to be engaging in electoral fraud on a massive level, and the mainstream media decides this isn't a story, not relevant? Joe Biden won the election, but election fraud? No, you don't understand. Joe Biden won the election. So that means that all alleged stories about election fraud are completely irrelevant. They are? Yes. I don't understand. Why are they completely irrelevant? Because Joe Biden won the election. It's really that simple. This from Christina Lila at Gateway Pundit. President Trump's personal lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, and Trump campaign senior legal advisor, Jenna Ellis, appeared before Arizona state lawmakers in a public hearing on Monday. The hearing was chaired by Representative Mark Fincham, District 11, with a number of House and Senate members on the hearing panel. Rhino of all rhinos, Governor Doug Ducey signed off on the certification of Arizona's false election results mid-hearing. On Monday, Fincham issued a call to withhold the state's electoral college votes for Joe Biden because, quote, he believes there is enough significant evidence of fraud to invalidate the state's vote, unquote. Now Fincham is calling on his fellow lawmakers to come together and recall Arizona's certification. I believe Doug Ducey signed a fraudulent document and he knew it, Fincham said. Fincham called it a rigged election, and we will never concede to a rigged election. Fincham appeared on the War Room with Steve Bannon on Friday. He said that county clerks are now coming forward and admitting something is off with the canvassing and the numbers are just not adding up. We got people coming out of the woodwork, Fincham said, adding that the legislature will just go around Governor Ducey. We only need to have 31 members of the House and 16 members of the Senate pass a resolution recalling our electors. It's that simple. Our constituents are blowing up about this. I have to say that I'm fed up with this term rhino, which means Republicans in name only. No, Ducey of Arizona and Kemp of Georgia and Raffensperger, the Secretary of State in Georgia. No, they are Republicans. It is their job to lose, but to lose in such a way that they personally benefit. And, you know, the Chamber of Commerce benefits and Silicon Valley benefits. This is why Trump is so revolutionary. I remember thinking, I guess it would have been around 2006. I started thinking about the 2004 presidential election, which was between George W. Bush and John Kerry. And I thought, what possible reason would working class white people or lower middle class white people have for voting for either George W. Bush or John Kerry? And I couldn't think of any. Oh, abortion, abortion, abortion. We're going to do something about abortion. You've never done anything about abortion at a federal level. It's just a cynical ploy to hook the rubes. That's all it is. People like Doug Ducey and Brian Kemp live in absolute terror of people on CNN saying mean things about them. They would rather cuck than fight. Vox Day writes, NC Scout explains some of the strangely specific language utilized by the president in his historic speech on December 2nd on American Partisan. Ask yourself this question. What was the purpose of yesterday's White House speech about election fraud and vote rigging? If you really think it was all about Trump communicating to the people, think again. This speech was really about Trump communicating with Chris Miller and the Department of Defense about foreign interference in the U.S. election, while laying out the key national security justifications that are necessary to invoke what I'm calling the national security option for defending the United States against an attempted cyber warfare coup. About 30 minutes into the speech, he invokes legal language that clearly references Trump's September the 12th, 2018 executive order, which describes remedies for foreign interference in U.S. elections. Here's what Trump says, quote, the only conceivable reason why you would block common sense measures to verify legal eligibility for voting is you are trying to encourage, enable, solicit, or carry out fraud. It is important for Americans to understand that these destructive changes to our election laws were not a necessary response to the pandemic. The pandemic simply gave the Democrats an excuse to do what they were trying to do for many, many years, unquote. Note carefully the phrase, trying to encourage, enable, solicit, or carry out fraud. Where have we heard something very similar before? In the 2018 executive order, which describes who will be subjected to having all their assets seized by the United States government. And note that this applies to corporations, individuals, partnerships, and even nonprofits. quote, Section 2A2 to have materially assisted, sponsored, or provided financial, material, or technological support for, or goods or services to, or in support of any activity described in subsection A1 and subsection A1 to have directly or indirectly engaged in, sponsored, concealed, or otherwise been complicit in foreign interference in a United States election. Thus, Trump just invoked the 2018 executive order and sent an undeniable signal to Chris Miller at the Department of Defense, as well as many other groups, that the Democrats, the treasonous media, and the complicit big tech giants have all engaged in concealing, advocating, or supporting foreign interference in the U.S. election. Vox Day comments, it was also a clear warning to the Supreme Court and the state legislatures. If they don't do their duty, the president will. And he has firmly established the legal grounds for his doing so. But what may be the most encouraging aspect of the article is the way the author traces the legal establishment of the cyber warfare infrastructure used to observe and record the 2020 election sting back to September 2018. What we now know with absolute certainty is that Trump, Miller, Cohen, Watnick, and other key players put the cyber warfare infrastructure in place in 2018 that would allow them to unleash a domestic military response to arrest, detain, and prosecute all those who were complicit in the attack on America. It's just an extraordinary situation. These are extraordinary days that we are living through. We have had prima facie evidence, tons of it, of election fraud in half a dozen states or more. And the attitude of the Democrats, the media, and the elite is, it doesn't matter. Why? Because Joe Biden won the election. No, wait a minute. If Joe Biden's campaign cheated to win the election, that would mean logically that he didn't actually win the election. No. You don't understand. Joe Biden won the election. Oh, yes, Joe Biden. I fractured my foot after trying to pull my dog's tail after coming out of the shower. Yeah. This is from Jeff Poor at Breitbart. Thursday on FNC's The Ingraham Angle, Governor Brian Kemp acknowledged what was allegedly video evidence of suitcases of ballots at a Georgia ballot counting location opened and scanned once poll watchers departed the location, which was played during a hearing before the Georgia legislature earlier in the day. Kemp called it concerning and called on Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger to address the video. Oh, no question about it, he said. Certainly, Laura, today was concerning. I think we are working right now, and hopefully the Secretary of State will update us on exactly what was going on. I've heard they had a monitor there. I would think it would be good for him to come out and say exactly what was going on. But I think this also gives him the opportunity to really look at specifically at the Fulton County recount that's still going on to make sure that the recount has been done in the right way and that we know if these were ballots, were they counted correctly, and if there were signatures on that. Notice I didn't hear anything about that in getting the GBI, the Georgia Bureau of Investigations, involved in this. This is from Tom Pappert at a National File. Georgia Governor Brian Kemp joined the Trump campaign's call for signature verification again today, calling on Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger to match the signature of mail-in ballot requests to the ballots returned by the voter. Kemp and Raffensperger are both Republicans. I called early on for a signature audit, said Kemp. Obviously, the Secretary of State, per the laws and the Constitution, would have to order that. He has not done that. Kemp then doubled down. I think it should be done. There needs to be transparency on that. I would call again for that. And I think in the next 24 hours, hopefully, we'll see a lot more from the hearings the legislature had today, and we'll be able to see what the next steps are. Kemp previously called for signature verification immediately after certifying the vote. This was before President Donald Trump went on to begrudge his lack of action and said he regrets endorsing Kemp during his hotly contested 2018 gubernatorial race against Stacey Abrams. Kemp has so far resisted many calls for a special session of the Georgia legislature. This would allow legislators to fully examine the evidence of voter fraud, including the bombshell video of vote counters telling observers to leave, then opening suitcases full of votes and counting them in the middle of the night. If physiognomy is real, and I believe that it does, take a look at Governor Kemp of Georgia. He does not look like a trustworthy man, does he? In fact, he looks like he comes from central casting, playing a rich white crook. That's what he looks like. Let's go to the chat, see what's happening there. Good evening, Tom Anderson, Paul Casso, 88, Emmett Kelly's Earth, William Hicks. Will the flowers be sold? It's difficult. This place, if the place is sold, the place has to be emptied. I can't really imagine, assuming I move back to Victoria, carrying them on the ferry. So yes, they may be lost in the shuffle. I don't know. Tom Anderson says, Drudge, just another establishment shill. DB Cooper says, can you see the broken water pipe in the video? No. If you're going to talk about a broken water pipe, especially under such circumstances, it would probably be a good idea to come up with some video. I mean, you could fake the video easily enough. Palcasso 88, Rubicon was a great show on AMC. William Hicks posted the video on Facebook where the fact check stuff was automatically added. It is an embarrassment. The only fact checkers who matter are the Georgia senators who conducted the hearing. KMG, is Trump going to be able to pull off the win? Says Tom Anderson. I do believe that he will. Hello, Professor Paul. Again, Tom Anderson, Biden looks so weak and frail, hobbling along, wearing a mask, and now a boot for his broken foot. Jim Smith says Rhino is as outdated as Freepers. Yes, I remember that phrase, Freepers. Head McNeck says, yes, Rhino is a severely outdated and useless phrase in the age of Trump. Yes, there's the Trump party and there is the Republicans. And despite the many, many favors that Trump has done for Republican congressmen, senators, and governors, there are a great many of them who do not want to return the favor. William Hicks says the media narrative about the election last month, no evidence of fraud, time to move on. Woman waits 35 years to accuse Scottish nominee of attempted rape. She should be believed. David Wright says Trump needs a wartime consigliere. That's from The Godfather. William Hicks says Dr. Ford had no date, a time, a place, no physical evidence, no video, no witnesses, and a story with logical holes big enough for a truck to drive through. Octopus Knight says we got to get rid of all of the Tinos, Trumpists in name only. Jim Smith pulled the dog's tail. That's his story, and he's sticking to it. Yeah, wet feet on the bathroom floor. What was the dog doing in the bathroom, or what? I think he just fell over. I think he got dizzy and just, fell over, tripped on something. Josh Randall Disavow says, we're going to have to take up arms and remove these people from power, fam, in Minecraft. Yes, of course. Always in Minecraft. Why was Joe pulling the dog's tail? Eric S. says, the Biden family are complete freaks. Well, perhaps he's reverted to childlike behavior. This is the sort of thing that small children do. They will pull dogs and cats' tails, and then they learn that dogs and cats do not like having their tails pulled. And sometimes it ends in some unpleasantness for these children, as apparently it did for Joe. Okay. Bob Paxson. No, I'm not going to repeat that. No, I love these artificial flowers. I've come to love them, but we'll see what happens. Emmett Kelly's Earth says, was he eating a pretzel too? William Hicks says, quite a contrast. Gotta hand it to Giuliani and his crew. They wasted no time collecting witness accounts, expert help, and other evidence, while Dr. Ford still doesn't know where that house is. Well, if you remember the Kavanaugh hearings, we found out the Democrats were cooking up this story for weeks or months. And they had to get it all together before they unleashed it. And then this ridiculous woman with a ridiculous voice and ridiculous phrases such as indelible in the hippocampus appeared on TV. Oh, I definitely believe that woman. There's nothing freakish about her. Oh, no, not in the slightest. She is a very respectable and respected thinker. It's funny that we've never heard anything from this woman since the hearing, wouldn't you say? Let's see what Jim Kunstler has to say this morning. His column is called A Hall of Smoke and Mirrors. If the drawn-out election melodrama were a movie, think 7 days in May meets 6 days in October meets Burn After Reading. You get a nice serving of treason in high places with a side dish of Cuban Missile Crisis, end of the world existential angst. And for dessert, a comic fiasco of bumbling government depravity as served up by the Coen brothers. The Democrats, you understand, are the party of chaos, yet President Trump's attempt to impose order on the scene has the quality of a clown car driving to put out a fire. Well, I think that's a little unfair to Trump. Given that the word has been put out in the legal community, I suppose to the very sort of lawyers who were involved in Florida in 2000, both for the Republicans and for the Democrats, that if you do any work on behalf of President Trump, you are finished in the legal community. Kunstler continues, it's almost impossible to see through the smoke and mirrors of all news media. The captive left media won't cover or even pursue legitimate news stories that counter its pre-cooked, self-serving narratives, while much of the alt news on the right seems to emanate from tinfoil hatland. Fact and emotion corrupt each other until truth itself is canceled, disgraced, and deplatformed. Meanwhile, authority hides off stage, wringing its hands, affecting powerless impartiality. I have to say that I suppose I kept up a skepticism about this, but when Jeffrey Epstein killed himself in prison, I thought, okay, that's it. It's force majeure time. All bets are off. You can't keep this one man alive. You can't. Oh, it was an accident. Oh, of course it was an accident. Let's see, case in point, according to Kunstler, Mr. Barr, the Attorney General, who told the Associated Press Tuesday, to date, we have not seen fraud on a scale that could have affected a different outcome in the election. A curious remark with all the weight of Department of Justice authority in a week that featured many broadcast spectacles of sworn testimony of ballot fraud before swing state committees plus videotape of vote counting irregularities vividly in action. Perhaps Barr is just stalling so as to not taint whatever case Trump's lawyers bring before the Supreme Court. But Barr must also be implying that his FBI, the investigative arm of his DOJ, suffers epic incompetence, Coen Brothers style, with a tinge of malice. Of course, that state of things has been obvious for 4 years in the long, dirty epic of Russiagate, another enormous legitimacy-killing mess that Barr has appeared reluctant to resolve, even though he anointed U.S. Attorney John Durham a special prosecutor this week. Since his appointment 2 years ago, Barr has expressed more than once in formal speeches his keen concern for institutional integrity, yet he appears to be playing games with it at a crucial moment in political history. The bigger questions for Lynn Wood and Sidney Powell surround what kind of evidence they will bring into a courtroom. Powell especially, because of a relationship with General Michael Flynn, the former head of the Defense Intelligence Agency, appears to have inside a DoD information that goes deep into the Dominion Vote Tabulation Company's origins, history, and abnormal activities in the 2020 election. That includes the seizure of Dominion servers at the giant U.S. military complex outside Frankfurt, where the CIA maintains its chief cyber warfare IT center outside the USA. General Flynn has been bottled up since 2017 in a corrupt prosecution, eventually dropped by the DOJ, but stalled for half a year by Judge Emmett Sullivan, even after he was ordered by the D.C. Circuit to dismiss the case. But now General Flynn has been liberated by presidential pardon to speak and act, and he's doing both in startling terms. On Wednesday, he joined with retired three-star General Thomas McEnery in calling for the president to declare martial law in order to use military tribunals to investigate and prosecute treason in the election. They're not the only ones clattering about that. They allege that Dominion Systems, which is not an American-owned company, invited meddling by several foreign nations and, in fact, enabled it through connections to the internet. There is evidence that Chinese companies linked to the Chinese Communist Party are majority investors in the holding company out of Switzerland, UBS Securities, that owns Dominion. And lurking in the background of that is the evidence exposed from Hunter Biden's laptop of multi-million-dollar deals for the Biden family to represent Chinese companies affiliated with China's intel service. Is it outlandish to wonder if Joe Biden is a national security risk? Is it at least worth looking into, considering the evidence trail? I have to say, with regard to voting machines and the internet, to my mind, if voting machines were connected to the internet, or there was any kind of software update that took place after the polls closed, that is sufficient grounds for invalidating the election. Because why would voting machines be connected to the internet? Why would there be software updates? There's only one possible reason for that, and that is fraud. Kunstler continues, another story out there says that behind the election hijinks is a war underway between the DoD and the CIA. On Wednesday, Acting Secretary of Defense Christopher Miller announced that all special operations run by the CIA would henceforward report to the Secretary of Defense. In effect, the president has ordered the dismantling of the CIA's troublemaking capabilities, reducing the agency to the task of intel analysis. This means, for instance, ending the CIA's ability to foment color revolutions, coups d'etat, in foreign lands, with the implication that irregularities around the Dominion system may have amounted to an attempted color revolution in the USA. Is it worth wondering whether former CIA Director John Brennan, a leftist activist and probably an architect of Russiagate, was involved in any of the election ops? If the FBI won't question him about it, who will? Answer: the Department of Defense. Ditto Gina Haspel, current CIA director. After all, what were the Dominion servers doing at the CIA server farm in Germany? Events are moving quickly under the plodding surface of the ongoing swing state hearings, which are largely concerned with on-site mail-in ballot fraud shenanigans. Will the Supreme Court take a case in the few days left before the state vote certification deadline next Tuesday? Will Trump intervene with some extraordinary measure, martial law, the Insurrection Act, to actually abort the election and bring about some kind of do-over? Will the country survive its own feckless inability to hold a credible vote? Stand by me on all that. J.B. Shirk has a piece in American Thinker, "Because I Said So, Government is a Disaster." Trying to preserve the integrity of American elections by insisting that Americans not speak about their real concerns only makes the 2020 election outcome more suspect. Why are you forcing me to wear a mask but not forcing me to wear disposable gloves? Because I said so. Why are Fortune 500 stores allowed to stay open while local businesses must go bankrupt? Because I said so. Why must I believe the 2020 election was untainted by fraud when nothing about it smells right? Because I said so. And I suppose another answer that's particularly relevant to this argument from authority is, what are you going to do about it? Well, Trump has access to the insurrection. act. Seems to me to be fully justified. Shirk continues, if any lesson has been driven home during the last year, it's that the public must stop thinking for itself and let the government do its thinking for it. Questioning the wearing of masks is called unpatriotic. Questioning the authority of local politicians to ban family and church gatherings is called selfish. Questioning the legitimacy of the presidential election is called dangerous. In the United States, however, the government is not meant to be separate from the people. It is meant to be representative of the people, and its application of power is at all times checked by the people. It is a form of consensual government. The buck stops with us, not the governing class. Representative government in the United States is hanging by a thread, and there's nothing wrong with saying that out loud. Former House Speaker Paul Ryan recently told Bank of America's European Credit Conference that, quote, legal challenges to the outcome and the attacks on our voting system really need to stop because they will only serve to undermine our faith in our system of government, our faith in our democracy, unquote. In other words, voters are not supposed to think for themselves because Paul Ryan says so. Lynn Lechter has a piece in American Thinker called, Is the Democrats' Election Heist Too Big to Fail? President Trump and Fox News enjoyed a mutually beneficial relationship until loyalty already fraying. Fox betrayed Trump on election evening by prematurely calling Arizona for Biden. Only stalwart reporters such as Mark Levin, Judge Jeanine Pirro, Lou Dobbs, and Sean Hannity remain by Trump's side. Republican elected officials who retained power are mostly mute, although the predicted blue wave never materialized as Republicans flipped House seats and Senate control is so close that it will only be decided after the results of a Georgia runoff election are known. Feckless state governors and attorneys general overseeing election preparations stood idly by as Democrats set up the apparatus for the big election steal. Republicans in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania were the exception, resisting the illegal power grab the Democrats had implemented by a massive mail-in ballot scheme and extending by 3 days the deadline to vote. Republican state officials appealed to the Supreme Court. Their success should have been a slam dunk, only it wasn't. The already tainted Chief Justice, John Roberts, who seemingly rules outside the four corners of the law, sided with the three Democrats on the case. In a 4-4 decision, the lower court case stood. Not only was an illegal precedent set, but the incomprehensible decision also had a chilling effect and stopped other state officials similarly situated from appealing to the court as well. The foreseeable mayhem that has occurred post-election is far greater than imagined. As the days dwindle and the ticking of the clock signals time running out, many questions remain. Who owns Dominion? Who owns the software housed in Dominion machines? Where are ballots counted and stored? What happened to empty provisional ballots returned by voters who hadn't requested them and or changed their minds and decided to vote in person? What will be done to ensure there are no repeats of the disastrous election of 2020? This massive corruption cannot stand. The Supreme Court must join our band of brothers. Hang on, I have to make a lighting adjustment. Let me see how dark it has become. Just a second. And we're back. Okay. Let's take a look at the chat, see what's going on there. Okay. All right. Alex DeLarge says, really, was I wrong about the election? DB Cooper. I said Alex DeLarge was mixing it up with the J5 killer on Twitter. Okay. I seem to recall being right about that, says Alex DeLarge. Dennis Dale Untethered says, fretting about credibility with the media is a fool's errand. Well, no, especially when someone like Chris Cuomo, who is a clown, who has been proved to be faking his quarantine, says, no, we're not going to cover Trump's 46-minute speech, which he said is the most important of his lifetime. because Trump is the least of our problems right now, and Trump is toxic. Yeah, well, these people in the media might feel a little different when faced with, say, I don't know, United States Special Forces. Matthew Carpenter says election fraud is a distraction, very little evidence. We need to regroup and attack the GOP over their betrayal. No, I don't think it's a distraction, and I think there is tons and tons of evidence. There have been revotes for much less than this in recent history, too. Emmett Kelly-Zer says, I remember the New York Times going on and on about how critical a handful of Facebook pages allegedly bought by Russia were in throwing the 2016 election. But now, crickets. Newspaper of record, ha. Tom Anderson says, conservatives will continue to lose as long as they have the Alex DeLarge mindset, and unfortunately, too many of them do. Well, I don't know. For a start, just stop calling yourselves conservatives, because that name, that brand, if you will, is irretrievably tainted. Okay. I've already, yes, let's see. Yeah, I already looked at Drudge, and Fauci says January will be terrible. Worst case scenario. Will it stop being terrible on January the 21st? Perhaps. Of course, the difficulty here in ramping up all this panic and hysteria that, it's going to end now. Why? Because we say so? But wait, everyone is going to die. And I don't know that it will be that easy, actually, to bring people back to normal now that they have been, impressed with the belief that every other single person on earth represents a deadly threat to them. It's a sort of a difficult thing to walk back. Okay, and yeah, I'll talk about Joe Biden in a minute. It's from National File. GOP Chair Kelly Ward calls for immediate legislative hearing into voter fraud. Arizona legislators call for forensic audit of Maricopa's Dominion voting machines. Anything new from the Gateway Pundit? Breaking: 76 of 141 Republican representatives in Pennsylvania send letter to Congress asking them to reject state's 20 electors. Obama judge in Nevada denies Trump campaign's lawsuit, ignores 20 books full of evidence. And yes, more about Ruby from Georgia, anti-Trump Democrat in Georgia's suitcase scandal, caught running same batch of ballots through tabulator 3 times. If you're going to engage in crime, serious crime, including the type of crime which could be constituted as sedition or treason, probably not a good idea to go to work advertising your name and your business. Yeah, not a good idea. But I guess they fight with the army they have, not the army they want. And what is happening at the Federalist? Chuck Schumer endorses Biden's plan to force public schools to allow males in female bathrooms. You see, if you can steal an election, then you can do anything you like. As unpopular as it is, despite the fact that it infuriates millions, tens of millions of people, because again, in effect, what they're saying is, what are you going to do about it? Ooh, are you talking about revolution here? And I'm reminded that in the indictment of the Oklahoma City bomber, the United States Department of Justice included as evidence the fact that the bomber was in possession of tracts by Samuel Adams and Thomas Jefferson. Yes, only wicked people could be impressed by Thomas Jefferson and Samuel Adams. Drink his beer, but don't read what he had to say. Scott Adams tweets, the fake news created an environment in which Republican witnesses could be physically threatened and intimidated during vote counting, a total destruction of the Republic, and the bullies would believe they were on the side of good. The enemy of the people did that to us. Neither free nor fair, the 2020 U.S. presidential election, which is an ebook by Joel Pollack. And let's see if there's anything interesting. Oh, I see KG, boss of Breezewood. This account is temporarily restricted. Oh, yes, view profile? Okay, well, he hasn't posted in a while because he has been restricted. J5 Killer is still up there. He retweets Peter Navarro, what I'm seeing, affidavits, testimony, videos, photos, court filings, what's wrong, outright fraud, mishandled ballots, due process fouls, equal protection violations, voting machine hijinks, statistical anomalies. Vernon Jones had tweeted, if you think this election is over, you must be in the basement with Joe Biden. And Donald Trump, an hour ago, tweeted, see you tomorrow at 7 p.m. Valdosta, Georgia. That should be fun. Bernard Carrick had tweeted, breaking news, Michigan State Judge orders forensic inspection of Antrim County election machines and prohibits the destruction of evidence relating to the 2020 election. Antrim County, huh? It must have been colonized by Irishmen. Nate Kane tweeted, President Trump is asking all Christians to pray today at 4 o'clock Eastern time when they go to the Supreme Court. Also, 3 members of our team have provided expert witness testimony and declarations with exhibits that are being filed in all 6 states and in the District of Columbia today. Representative Mo Brooks, it is the duty of the United States Congress to be the final judge and jury of whether to accept or reject electoral college submissions by states and to elect the president and vice president of the United States. Evan Kilgore, Pennsylvania is going to flip, Georgia is going to flip, Arizona is going to flip. Once one falls, they all will. Oh, and Randy Quaid gets a word in. Joe Biden will be remembered as the Rosie Ruiz of presidential races. And Greg Butler, the last 48 hours have made it clear that Trump is going to pull off the greatest comeback in American political history. His opponents are cracking up under the intense pressure of MAGA. We are winning. J5 Killer comments. Exactly. Okay. This was very amusing. It's science, people. These people have any idea what science means? If they have any idea what empirical evidence means. Alex Berenson tweeted, my old friend, former friend, Andrew Sorkin, bleeding, it's science, while blocking me from coming on his show to talk about what the science around masks actually says, encapsulates everything that is wrong with the way 95% of the media covers COVID. Funny story, Alex Berenson says, CNBC told me that Joe on the Squawk Show, Joe Kernan, Squawk Box, wanted me on to talk COVID. We confirmed an interview. Then it was canceled. Then it was rescheduled and canceled again. Then they told me I could come on, but only if Zeke Emanuel was there to debate me. I said, fine. And we tried to schedule that, but somehow that appearance never happened either. Weird, huh? Hi, Andrew Sorkin. It's science. Am I right? From the Hill, 2 CNBC hosts got into an extraordinary early morning fight over COVID-19 restrictions and masks on Friday during a discussion over how restaurants are being devastated by the pandemic. Rick Santelli, a CNBC personality who won fame and attention with a rant from the Chicago Mercantile Exchange suggesting that a tea party should be started during that recession, argued that it didn't make sense to shut down restaurants when parking lots at big box retailers were jam-packed with cars and people. You can't tell me that shutting down, which is the easiest answer, is the only answer, Santelli said, which drew an immediate rebuke from another CNBC personality, Andrew Ross Sorkin, who is also a financial columnist for the New York Times and has previously had on-air disputes with colleagues on CNBC over the appropriate precautions to take for COVID-19. Rick, just as a public health and public service announcement for the audience, the difference between a big box retailer, Sorkin said, before Santelli cut him off. Who is this? Santelli asked. The two were speaking from different settings, along with another 5 CNBC personalities and guests. Someone off screen at that point can be heard saying, "Who else? Who else?" which appeared to lead Santelli to nod his head. Sorkin responded by holding out his arm and hand to the camera for Santelli to let him speak. The difference between a big box retailer and a restaurant, or frankly, even a church, are so different, it's unbelievable, Sorkin said as Santelli shook his head up and down and crossed his arms in front of his chest, signaling evident frustration with Sorkin. The two began to shout over one another, with Santelli yelling, "I disagree, I disagree, I disagree. You can have your thoughts and I can have mine." While Sorkin said, "You were required to wear a mask. It's science. I'm sorry, it's science." "It's not science," Santelli said with exasperation. 500 people in a mall aren't any safer than 150 people in a restaurant that holds 600. I don't believe it. Sorry, I don't believe it. And I live in an area where there are lots of restaurants that have fought back and they don't have any problems and they're open. "Well, you don't have to believe it, but you're doing a disservice to the viewer," Sorkin replied, before Santelli said, "You are doing a disservice to the viewer. You are. I'm sorry, I would like to keep our viewers as healthy as humanly possible. The idea of packing people in restaurants," Sorkin said before Santelli talked over him. "I think our viewers are smart enough to make part of those decisions on their own." CNBC's Steve Leisman, then, perhaps he pronounces it Leisman, then asked, "How's that working out for you, Rick?" "Look at the numbers," Santelli said. "It's working out fine, Rick. It's working out fine." He then said he understood that a lot of people were dying and it's a horrible thing. "I just think the way we deal with it isn't optional." Another anchor then ended the conversation saying it was clear people wouldn't agree. Oh, you got the people on your side. Do you? CNBC? From Steve Watson at Summit News, Biden to launch Mask Up for 100 days campaign. And here he is on CNN looking particularly Joker-esque. One of someone who I chat with on Twitter said that he thought that despite the plastic surgery making Joe Biden look like the Joker, he thought it was the key to his later electoral success, because without the plastic surgery, he was on the verge of becoming a jowly man. I mean, Joe Biden is very much a petty, nasty man. But he may be onto something there, that the plastic surgery makes him look far more friendlier than he actually is. Joe Biden declared Thursday that he will ask Americans to mask up for 100 days and wants Anthony Fauci to become chief medical advisor to the president. Biden made the comments in an interview with CNN's Jake Tapper Thursday, saying, "Just 100 days to mask, not forever, 100 days. And I think we'll see a significant reduction." Biden also vowed to take the vaccine publicly, just like Obama, Bush, and Clinton have all vowed to do when Fauci tells them it's safe. Fauci, he's like, what? The high priest of America now? He's like a cardinal archbishop. He's like the Pope of America, that all these people are supposedly going to risk their health because Dr. Fauci says it's okay. Have you noticed the big love for big pharma these days? Now, if you've read anything about big pharma, for instance, the book Big Pharma, you will learn that the FDA and other health authorities around the world simply take the drug company's word for it. "Oh, we've done all this research." Well, you haven't. What does your research say? Big surprise that this new drug is both efficacious and safe. And the FDA says, well, that's good enough for us. The FDA is not really in a position to do any independent investigation of this because it would be, I suppose, very expensive. Do you want this man in charge of the nuclear codes? You want this guy next to the football? It's from Jim Hofstad, Gateway Pundit. On Thursday night, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris went on with Jake Tapper on CNN for another fluff interview. We expected no less. It's Jake Tapper. Biden joked that he will step down if he and Kamala butt heads. Like I told Barack, if I reach something that's a fundamental disagreement we have based on a moral principle, I'll develop some disease and say I have to resign. Did he mean to say that Kamala Harris would develop some disease, or say she had developed some disease and would have to resign? The Vice President of the United States has no power. The Vice President of the United States breaks tie votes. That is the only power that the VP has. When the American system started, there was a great deal of uncertainty about the vice presidency and its powers. And when John Adams was vice president, he threw his weight around to the extent that the Senate told him to stay away from the Senate chamber or know the reason why. Every president says, oh, yes, my vice president is going to be intimately involved in every aspect of my administration, blah, blah, blah. That's typically not the case, although Dick Cheney seemed to become co-president under George W. Bush. Let's see, Kamala Harris attacked Joe Biden viciously during the campaign. Kamala Harris got, fewer than 1% of primary votes? She didn't even last until Iowa? And Joe Biden, chose her, because she's a woman and because she has dark skin. It's that simple. It doesn't mean that he has to listen to her. I suspect if he's, if there's women that he wants to hear from or be told what to do, I think Dr. Jill will be that woman. From Bloomberg, Elise Young and David Baker, with virus spreading in homes, U.S. governors run out of weapons. Again, the military metaphors, frontline employees, and that run out of weapons. Oh, well, if we had the latest in, surface-to-air missiles, then we could deal with COVID-19. Once again, COVID-19 is not sentient, and it can't be coerced or reasoned with. Running out of weapons. With virus spreading in homes, yes, that's where the virus tends to spread the most, with the people you spend the most time with, in your home or in hospitals or nursing homes. And if there's any justice in the world, after this is all over, the medical profession, or perhaps the nursing profession, or certainly the hospitals, their reputations will never recover. From the U.S. Sun, Mitt Romney says Trump's leadership in COVID pandemic has been a great human tragedy and fraud claims are damaging America. Well, the eternal Mormon, that's all I have to say about that creep. And rhinos, huh? Okay. This is from John Binder at Breitbart. Tucker Carlson says Senate Republicans are attempting to pack foreign workers into high-paying U.S. jobs, while nearly 18 million Americans are jobless. On Thursday evening, Carlson slammed Senate Republicans for failing to stop Senator Mike Lee's, another eternal Mormon, green card giveaway that will allow Indian nationals to effectively monopolize employment-based green cards for at least a decade and tech corporations to privatize the system. The giveaway solidifies that employment-based visas only go to temporary foreign visa workers, mostly on H-1B visas, who have been imported to the U.S. by corporations to replace American workers, thus rewarding companies who outsource American white-collar jobs. As noted by Carlson, the giveaway comes as the Justice Department files suit against Facebook, which lobbied for the giveaway for allegedly discriminating against Americans in favor of foreign workers. We've known for a long time that Silicon Valley wants foreign workers to dominate our economy. They don't care what kind of effect it has on Americans. What's surprising is that in a time of mass unemployment, and that's what we have now, mass unemployment, the Republican Party of all people is helping them do it. That's happening. Yesterday, the Republican-controlled Senate unanimously passed a law called the Fairness for High-Skilled Immigrants Act, as if the problem with America is that we don't have enough fairness for people from other countries. No concern about fairness for Americans. The whole process took a matter of moments. It was led by Utah Senator Mike Lee, and without any objections, it passed. It's like they don't have to worry about Trump anymore, or so they think. So let's get back to doing what we love best, selling out our own people, so that when we retire, then the gravy starts flowing. Mike Lee, he's not going to become as rich as Clinton or Obama, but I'm sure he'll be very comfortable indeed. Perhaps, besides all the private deals, the Cato Institute could make him a fellow, or the American Enterprise Institute. 2020 has been full of stories which incite not only disbelief, but rage. And I guess, the scholastics were criticized, and to this day, for their obsession with minutiae, such as infamously, how many angels can dance on the head of a pin? Well, in Britain, we have a new neo-scholastic question, which is, does a Scotch egg constitute a substantial meal? Yes, this is the sort of thing that governments and police are particularly concerned with, obsessed with. One might say, Paul Joseph Watson at Summit News. Police in the UK are patrolling pubs and throwing out customers who they deem to not be eating a substantial meal under COVID-19 rules. The confusion stems from rules that dictate pubs located in Tier 2 regions can only stay open if they also operate as restaurants. This means they can only serve alcohol if they also serve a substantial meal. Earlier this week, a cabinet minister suggested that a Scotch egg, which is a hard-boiled egg surrounded by sausage meat and coated in breadcrumbs, was enough to constitute a substantial meal. That was Michael Gove, I believe. This led pubs to take advantage and serve Scotch eggs, which, by the way, are disgusting, while avoiding having to put on a full dinner service in a desperate bid to remain open. However, despite the government indicating that this was acceptable, police are entering pubs, harassing customers, and eventually throwing them out if they are found to be eating Scotch eggs. Police have been criticized for their overzealous enforcement of the new rules on pubs after landlords reported officers arguing over whether Scotch eggs were a substantial meal and threw out customers who had finished eating, reports The Telegraph. Patrick Dardis, chief executive of pub chain Young's, said officers were also demanding customers leave as soon as they had finished their meals, preventing them from ordering more drinks. As if we haven't got enough to contend with, we have had some overzealous officials going into pubs unnecessarily, and it's a bit intimidating for customers. According to reporter Helen Horton, police are also asking people what their business meetings are about. Under the rules, people are only allowed to meet others who don't live in the same household if the meeting is work-related. The fact that police are patrolling pubs, Paul Joseph Watson concludes, looking to harass people for eating Scotch eggs is patently ludicrous, especially when you consider the UK's rising violent crime rate and the fact that police have told people they will no longer be able to respond to burglaries. I believe I mentioned this before on the show that I'm typically not an advocate of revolution because all of the mayhem involved. But when one looks at what is happening in England, I don't know. Is there any way out? These police, they are terrified of criminals. They don't like to try to stop criminals. Oh, but people, drinking drinking a pint and having Scotch egg in a pub, yeah, they'll sort them out. All right. I wonder how long before there is direct action against such interventions. This is again from a Breitbart from John Nolte. Governor Kristi Noem's grandmother died November 22nd. She was a nursing home resident, 98 years old, and most importantly, tested negative for the coronavirus. Did you get that? She did not die of the coronavirus. She was not even sick with the coronavirus. She tested negative. Now look at these headlines from the Daily Beast. Anti-mask gov's grandmother died in nursing home ravaged by COVID. Business Insider. Kristi Noem's grandmother died in a nursing home hit by COVID-19. The Daily Beast. And yet Kristi Noem continues to downplay the virus, refuse a mask mandate, and ignore the terrible price her state is paying. From the Raw story. Pandemic downplaying GOP governor's grandmother dies in coronavirus-plagued nursing home. From MSN. Kristi Noem's grandmother died in nursing home ravaged by COVID. From Yahoo News. Kristi Noem's grandmother died in a nursing home hit by COVID-19 as the South Dakota governor continued to downplay the virus. Truly the enemies of the people. Absolute scum. Julie Kelly writes in American Greatness, shut up and take it. Dave Morris was fed up as a gainfully employed television news reporter aired a live segment outside a small cafe to tell viewers that Morris was keeping his business open despite a government order to close it. The Portage, Michigan restaurant owner confronted him. The Kalamazoo Health Department had issued a warning to Morris on December 1 for allowing indoor dining against the wishes of Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer. He was instructed to shut down his business immediately or face a fine imposed by the government. The local journalist was on the scene, however, to tattle. Everyone needs to stand up, Morris told a WWMT-TV reporter Tavarius Haywood on Wednesday. This isn't an order, this is tyranny. Wake up, stand up, this is America, be free. Haywood later tweeted about his own bravery in the face of an angry business owner who interrupted him. Morris, who has owned DNR's Daily Grind Cafe for 12 years, says he's lost $100,000 in business this year and is going broke. I can go down quietly or I can go down making some noise so people understand what's going on, he said. But this is America in the year 2020. People like Morris, or really anyone not empowered with an executive pen or cable news gig or a sinecure in some public health bureaucracy, are supposed to go down and go down quietly. Shut up and take it. Want your kids to attend class in the public school you pay exorbitant property taxes to fund? No, shut up and take it. Want to keep your lifeblood up and running so you can pay your bills and your employees? No, shut up and take it. Want to go outside without a contaminated face cloth covering your mouth and nose? No, shut up and take it. Want to gather the family for your annual Thanksgiving dinner? No, shut up and take it. Want to have your vote count in the most consequential presidential election in modern history? No, shut up and take it. This is the preamble for all future totalitarian states. Next up, your personhood paper in the form of a COVID-19 immunization report to show you're in good standing with the regime. Let's go to lockdown skeptics. Jonathan Barr. It turns out that Michael Gove, British Cabinet Minister, was telling porkies about the state of COVID-19 and hospitals in Britain, vastly over-exaggerating the crowding of hospitals in order to get the House of Commons to vote for an extension of the lockdown. I don't know, why would anyone be surprised by this? A recent article in Science Digest considers why, despite billions of pounds spent, a test and trace system established, and much other activity, the government still ended up with a second economically ruinous national lockdown. While the article accepts many of the nostrums about COVID-19 that lockdown skeptics would not, is worth highlighting as a reminder of why the national response has been so damaging. On the fixation with centralized testing and tracing, initially the narrative given was that contact tracing was not worth doing as the outbreak phase had moved from containment to mitigation as of March 17th. The reality was that testing and contact tracing could not be performed on a large scale as there was no capacity to do this. After considerable criticism from the public, academics, and public health bodies, there was a shift in government policy. Belatedly, more than £12 billion was spent on a centralized testing and tracing system. For context, this staggering sum is more than the combined budget of all primary care and public health in England. Glaringly, the leadership for this initiative lacked significant public health expertise. It started, a report from the Mail Online, on the efforts of North Yorkshire Police to police travel between tiers. Oh, Yorkshire Police. These are the same people who look the other way. Well, rape gangs, Asian rape gangs had their way with British children. Yeah, I guess that would be the same Yorkshire Police. A police force has been compared to the Gestapo after guarding its borders using number plate recognition cameras to stop drivers leaving Tier 3. North Yorkshire Police says it is using automatic number plate recognition technology to monitor vehicles and track people who might try to leave Tier 3 to go to pubs or restaurants in neighboring Tier 2 areas. The force warned people could face enforcement action under public health regulations if they are caught making non-essential journeys into and out of the county, including $200 fines, doubling for further offences up to £6,400. But the move has sparked a fierce public backlash as furious Twitter users compared the local police force to the Gestapo, the official secret police of Nazi Germany and in German-occupied Europe. Privacy campaign group Big Brother Watch called the police behavior totalitarian and warned of a growing surveillance state and a civil liberties landslide, with director Silke Carlo telling the Mail, "This is not policing by consent." Questions about the vaccine, as I'm using a cartoon of two rats, and one of them asks the other, "Are you going to get vaccinated?" And the other rat says, "You're crazy. They haven't finished human trials." With the rollout of the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine set to begin next week after it received temporary authorization from the Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency, Kit Knightley has some burning questions over at Off Guardian. I quote from the piece and add some other sources. The claim is that they are 95% effective, but where did this come from? The Pfizer vaccine trial included nearly 44,000 people, half getting vaccine, half getting a placebo. In total, from the 44,000, 170 were later recorded as having become infected with COVID-19. 162 of them in the placebo group, 8 of them in the vaccine group. The vaccine is therefore credited with preventing 154 cases of COVID-19, or 95%. This implies that the entire trial of 44,000 people is deemed a success based on the potentially multivariant outcome from less than 4% of those involved. The details of the trial are hard to come by, so we have yet to find out how these 170 people were even diagnosed with COVID-19. Was it a clinical diagnosis based on symptoms or PCR test? Either method would raise serious questions about accuracy. Does it work? We have no idea. The article Kit Knightley links to by Peter Doshi in the British Medical Journal is worth reading on this. He writes, first, a relative risk reduction is being reported, not an absolute risk reduction, which appears to be less than 1%. Second, these results refer to the trial's primary endpoint of COVID-19 of essentially any severity, and importantly, not the vaccine's ability to save lives, nor the ability to prevent infection, nor the efficacy in important subgroups, e.g. frail elderly. Peter Doshi recommends full, open, and independent scrutiny of the underlying trial data in order to build confidence in its results and the vaccine's efficacy. Now, is it safe? The potential for complications down the line certainly exists. Further, the vaccine is based on new technology, an mRNA vaccine, which injects viral genetic material to generate an immune response. The technology has been in development for years, but this would be the first mRNA vaccine actually put to use. So is it safe? We don't know. However, the vaccine pushers and manufacturers clearly have doubts about its safety, since they have gone out of their way to guarantee they have total legal indemnity from prosecution or civil suits should something go wrong. Not a confidence booster, that. Yesterday, a number of readers flagged up a newly released government document, Regulation 174, Information for Healthcare Professionals, on Pfizer-BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine. It includes a summary of safety profile. The most frequent adverse reactions in participants 16 years and older were pain at the injection site, 80% fatigue, 60% headache, 50% myalgia, 30% chills, 20% arthralgia, and 10% pyrexia were usually mild or moderate in intensity and resolved within a few days after vaccination. Pediatric population. The safety and efficacy of COVID-19 mRNA vaccine in children under 16 years of age have not yet been established. Incompatibilities. In the absence of compatibility studies, this medicinal product must not be mixed with other medicinal products. Pregnancy. Animal reproductive toxicity studies have not been completed. COVID-19 mRNA vaccine is not recommended during pregnancy. For women of childbearing age, pregnancy should be excluded before vaccination. That always kills me. For women of childbearing age, so what are we talking about here? Women between 13 and 50? In addition, women of childbearing age should be advised to avoid pregnancy for at least 2 months after their second dose. Oh, so we can have a COVID-19 vaccine abortion surge. How about that? Okay. Let's go back to the chat here. See what's going on. Make a sit-up straight, says Quachalango. Was I slouching? It is a problem for me, I suppose. Bob Paxson, COVID, over 99% survival. The vax, yeah. Jonathan Pohl says we're going to have all kinds of mutants from the vaccine. People with tentacles. And they're like, someone was joking with me on Twitter the other day that this stuff has already sprouted eyeballs and McCready has got his flamethrower ready to deal with it. Thalidomide, yes. How long did the thalidomide lawsuits last for? 10 years, 20 years? Longer? The company, distillers, we didn't do anything wrong. We followed the best medical advice, etc., etc., etc. Quachalango says KMG needs to ring a bell, play a bomb or bullet sound or a train or ship horn between segments. That's a good idea, actually. Chogokin666 says Yorkshire would be coated in pudding and depressed. Octopus Knight says, is Orwell anywhere near as popular in the UK as it is in the USA? I don't know about that. I do know that C.S. Lewis, to name a contemporary of Orwell's, has an enormous fan base in the United States and is nowhere near as popular in Britain. Jonathan Pohl, what would a Yorkshire egg be like? Probably no sausage because Yorkshiremen are too cheap. Jonathan Pohl again, the Afghans and Turkmen make something very similar to Scotch eggs. Quachalango, I'll check them out even if they didn't show up on my MSN start page article, 54 ways to make eggs. I like eggs. I'm not fond of boiled eggs, and I'm not fond of scrambled eggs, really. So you're messing with the essence of the egginess there with your scrambled eggs. I flipped a quarter 4 times. Twice it came back heads and twice tails, says Jonathan Pohl. This is in reference to Tom Anderson, who says Elon Musk took 4 Wuhan virus tests in a row and 2 came back positive and 2 came back negative. What is the meaning of this? The meaning is that the PCR tests are worthless. That is the meaning. That is the meaning. I'm going to move away from COVID here and mention a story from Agence France Presse. French authorities will swoop down Thursday, that's yesterday, on dozens of mosques and prayer halls suspected of radical teachings as part of a crackdown on Islamic extremists following a spate of attacks, Interior Minister Gérald Darmanin said. He told RTL Radio that if any prayer hall was found to promote extremism, it would be closed down. He did not reveal which places of worship would be inspected, but in a note he sent to regional security chiefs, seen by AFP, he listed 16 addresses in the Paris region and 60 others around the country. These are, in some concentrated areas, places of worship that are clearly anti-Republican, Darmanin told RTL, where imams are followed by the intelligence services and where the discourse runs counter to our values. But he added the fact that only a fraction of the mosques in France were suspected of peddling radical theories, showed we are far from a situation of widespread radicalization. Yeah, under police surveillance. You know, when one of these sudden immigrant jihad syndrome cases pops up in Europe, someone gets high, tries to kill a bunch of Frenchmen or Germans or whatever, almost always they say, oh, yes, well, this person was, he was in the database. Oh, okay, so yeah, how many people are in this database? One gets the impression that there are, tens of thousands of names? It'd be rather difficult to follow them all around, wouldn't it? An excellent piece, which I cannot recommend more highly, in The American Thinker by Brian Jundeff, Dr. Brian Jundeff. Follow the science, except when the results are inconvenient. The all-knowing, all-caring, anointed guru of all things COVID, Dr. Anthony Fauci, has been wrong at least as often as he has been right, with the predictive value of a coin flip. Yet any scientific utterance from him is treated in the media as a scientific law on par with gravity. The CDC and the WHO also have a long string of flip-flops regarding the Wuhan flu. Here's an example. Hydroxychloroquine, a drug in common use for 6 decades, deemed safe for virtually the entire population, except for the rare few with an unusual heart arrhythmia, has now been deemed as unsafe as eating rat poison or cyanide in the minds of most media consumers. There have been 187 hydroxy studies, 122 of which were peer-reviewed. The word on Fox News and Twitter is that hydroxy will kill you, as Neil Cavuto proclaimed when President Trump told the world he was taking it. Yet the science says otherwise. If you look at early versus late treatment of COVID, which only makes sense, the fire department saves houses if they arrive when there is a small kitchen fire, not when the entire house is ablaze. 100% of these studies report positive effects for early treatment with hydroxychloroquine, meaning those not yet in the hospital and certainly not on a ventilator. And PCR test. He says, please read my summary of this COVID-19, of this COVID con. Others have reached the same conclusion. A legal ruling in Portugal found that the COVID PCR test is not fit for purpose, meaning mass testing. They determined that overly high amplification cycles lead to excessive false positives and unreasonable quarantines and business closures. The judges determined that a positive Chinese coronavirus test has only a 3% chance of actually being positive. The media chooses to ignore this court case because the ruling is inconvenient to their narrative. Compare how they lionize a Swedish teenager who says humans are warming and destroying the earth, but refuse to acknowledge Portuguese judges and their opinions. Death counts are reported no differently than COVID cases. Are they all reported Wuhan flu deaths due to the virus? Or did these individuals just happen to test positive before or after death? George Floyd tested positive for COVID and is likely included in CNN's touted death count. How many who die in hospice due to a terminal illness are labeled as COVID deaths? Is this good science or suppression of inconvenient data? Johns Hopkins University actually took a stab at the science of Chinese virus deaths before they decided the results were inconvenient and buried them. Hopkins researchers noted that the number of people who died last year is the same as this year. How could that be if hundreds of thousands are dying of the Wuhan flu? It turns out increases in COVID deaths are offset by decreases in deaths due to heart disease and other ailments. Has heart disease mysteriously disappeared this year? Or are heart attacks being called COVID deaths? Perhaps the same people counting deaths have been counting votes in Philadelphia and Detroit, simply shifting enough votes from Trump to Biden to keep the totals the same, but presenting a different and more convenient result. The scientists want clinical trials. Where are the trials on masks, social distancing, quarantining the healthy, closing the economy? There are none. When a study is actually performed, as in the Danish mask study, the results are deemed inconvenient and buried by the scientists and corporate media. If science were serious, as it should be, coronavirus data should be reviewed, analyzed, and presented objectively. Instead, we are seeing the opposite, where any results inconvenient to a largely political agenda are deemed inconvenient and hidden or deleted. Those presenting inconvenient results are castigated, maligned, and threatened by the ruling class for daring to challenge the orthodoxy. It's a remarkable story from the Daily Mail from Brussels, which is the Sodom and or Gomorrah of continental Europe, by Tim Stickings and Chris Pleasance. Guests at the Brussels Daddy Orgy, where an anti-alphabet people politician was caught breaking lockdown rules, thought the police who arrived to break up the party were part of the romp, the organizer claims. David Manzelli said that some of the 30 male guests had tried to unzip the pants of the policeman because they thought that the raid was part of the orgy after the event at his Brussels apartment was shut down last Friday. Manzelli's guest included Hungarian MEP Josef Széjar, I'm not sure I'm pronouncing that right, a conservative politician who has supported anti-alphabet people measures and who allegedly tried to escape through a window when police arrived. Széjar apologized and resigned from the nationalist Fidesz party on Wednesday after a rebuke from Hungary's Prime Minister Viktor Orbán, who called the MEP's actions indefensible. Manzelli told Polish outlet On It that he sometimes has 100 guests at his parties, including politicians from Poland, Hungary, France, Germany, Holland, Switzerland, Spain, and Ukraine. While the orgies are normally entirely legal, police closed down Friday's parties because it was breaking lockdown rules. Yes, spreading venereal disease, not a problem. Breaking lockdown rules, very serious problem. Following what Manzelli suspected was a tip-off by a rival sex party organizer in Brussels. Belgian police detained about 20 people at the house party. Prosecutors did not name anyone, but said a man with initials SJ and born in 1961 had tried to flee the venue along a gutter. Authorities said that he was found with narcotics in his backpack, but Széjar denied taking drugs and said he had offered to take a drugs test at the scene, but police did not carry one out. The police said that they found ecstasy pills. They were not mine. I know nothing of who put them there and how. I told that to police, he said in a statement. He was not carrying any ID, so police followed him back to his apartment where he showed his diplomatic passport and claimed immunity. Manzelli did not know everyone there, but recognized Széjar. Subsequently, he said guests at his parties would undress on arrival, some of them donning fetish gear, he said. We have Christmas coming. People are thirsty for meetings. It is absolutely normal that guys in the gay community are going to be searching for solutions to meet. Yeah, it reminds me of Barbara Grizzuti Harrison, the late American writer, who wrote about California in the 1970s. And she said that people have sex with each other in order to prove that when they say good morning, they mean it. We don't sit around drinking tea, Manzelli said. People are here for sex. Manzelli said he had not been charged and complained of rough treatment by Belgian police. Suddenly, my whole living room was full of cops, he said to a Belgian newspaper. They immediately started shouting, identity card now, but we weren't even wearing pants. How in God's name could we quickly conjure up our identity card? Indeed, Sodom and Gomorrah. What happened when the angels came down? They were accosted sexually by the perverts there, just like the cops. Oh, look, they brought in fake cops for us to have sex with. This is a disgusting story, and I suppose I might apologize for bringing it to your attention. But the reason I did so was this. We have been gaslighted about the nature of gay activity. that Andrew Sullivan wrote a book, what was it, 20 years ago or so, called Virtually Normal? No, sorry, not virtually normal. Not even close to virtually normal. But it's the world that we live in now. This is a very distressing story from my own country, Canada. Rachel Gilmore at Global News. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says the safe return of 2 Canadians detained in China remains the government's top priority amid reports of a potential deal to send Huawei executive Meng Wanzhou back home. He made the comment the day after the Wall Street Journal reported the news of a potential deal between the U.S. Department of Justice and Meng's representatives, one that would allow her to return home to China with a deferred prosecution agreement. Oh, and the understanding is if they let her go back to China, she would ever return to North America. Come on now. You could have to try harder than that. I'm not going to comment on those reports. Canadians know well that our top priority is the safe return of the 2 Michaels, Trudeau said when asked about the potential deal today. I think we're going to continue to work as hard as we possibly can to bring these 2 Michaels home. It's been extremely difficult for them, for their families, and their loved ones. We will continue to stand up for Canadians in difficulty anywhere around the world. Michael Spavor and Michael Kovrig were detained in apparent retaliation after Canada infuriated China by arresting Meng in December 2018. Canada did so at the behest of the United States, which had requested her extradition. Meng's arrest plunged Canada-China relations into a deep freeze. Spavor and Kovrig have been stuck in a Chinese prison, and another Canadian, Robert Schellenberg, was sentenced to die in China following a hastily scheduled retrial of his drug smuggling conviction in China just 1 month after Meng's arrest. Schellenberg has maintained his innocence since his arrest in 2014. China also briefly banned imports of Canadian pork and beef, claiming that a banned animal feed additive was found in a shipment of Canadian pork. Oh, so Justin Trudeau is doing everything he can. Oh, here's some of the things that he could do. That he could order Chinese diplomats to leave Canada. And if that doesn't work, he could start shutting down, he could shut down their embassy and their consulates. He could issue a statement calling on all Canadians in China to leave immediately, and that in the future, any Canadian who shows up in China cannot expect the protection of the Canadian government. And then I suppose if none of this worked, Trudeau could start moving against Chinese companies operating in Canada. Oh, nationalizing them, say. That might send a message to them. The message that he is sending right now, and we don't know to what extent, if any, Canada is involved in this alleged U.S. Department of Justice deal with Meng. But here's the message. If any of your CCP people commit crimes in Canada or the United States, not to worry, because China will simply kidnap foreigners and hold them hostage. Reading this, one really has to wonder just how suborned my country is. How many people have the communists bought off? How many politicians, how many businessmen, how many university professors, how many people in the media, etc., do they control? My guess is that it is a rather lot of people. And Trudeau's pusillanimous response to the kidnapping of 2 Canadians in China, I think is pretty clear evidence of this. Let's have a look at the chat. A phlegmaticus says, "Oi, mate, you got a license for that Scotch egg?" Yeah, I like doing that accent. Okay. Still talking about Scotch eggs, are we? Chocokin666 says an orgy would seem disgusting just based on what I perceive it would smell like. That reminds me of something that Claire Boothe Luce, who was a famous beauty who married Henry Luce, and she was a playwright. She had a hit play called The Women, which was turned into a hit movie. She was a congressman. She was an American ambassador, a delightful woman. She was a Roman Catholic, and she became friendly with the writer Wilfrid Sheed of Sheed and Ward, publishing fame. The publishers were his mother and father. And Wilfrid Sheed once asked Claire Boothe Luce whether she thought that sex was dirty, and she responded, "I don't know whether it's dirty, but it certainly is smelly," which made me laugh then and makes me laugh now. Billy Smith says, "Hi, Kevin. What's the best way for a future drinking party to contact you to be vetted?" Well, I have two email addresses, kevin_grace@hotmail.com and kevingrace@shaw.ca. You can contact me directly through those. If you follow me on Twitter, you can send me a direct message. Let's see, what else? KMG has learned how to pronounce the Chinese languages through osmosis, neighbors. No, I was reading about some composer. I went down this rabbit hole on Wikipedia last night, looking at radical 20th century American composers. And to my complete lack of shock, they're almost entirely homosexuals. But Chinese poet, medieval Chinese poet, and was it Li Bao or Li Bai? Maybe the names were even further apart than that. These are transliterations of the same name. I'm at a loss here. Bao and Bai, those are very different sounds, very different. Let's see. I don't know. I've talked about this before. You know, these Chinese opinion is completely nuts. That it's spelled M-E-N-G, but it's supposed to be pronounced Meng. Why? You came up with a completely new system of transliteration, and it doesn't tell you how to pronounce the names? But you know, sometimes I make a great effort to pronounce these foreign names correctly, and other times I don't. Josh Randall disavows, imagines a white Persian cat on KMG's lap. I like cats. I'm not fond of long-haired cats, though. They shed an awful lot. They seem to be more squally than short-haired cats. It seems to me, at any rate. Bob Paxson says, zippers wide shut. Yo mama, the cops at Stonewall did nothing wrong. Do you know who owned that bar? The mafia did. Do you know all of these disgusting places in New York City at that time were owned by the mafia? How about that? I guess they didn't really care how they made a buck, huh? The CCP virus cured everything, including cancer, says Jay Miller, and it certainly cured the flu. Apparently the flu no longer exists. Every year in the United States, tens of thousands of Americans die of the flu, but for some strange reason, that is not happening anymore. I wonder what reason that could be. I'll leave it to you in the chat. Oh, before I move on to the book club, what are you going to do about it? This is what our politicians say to us. This is a story. Well, actually, it's 4 weeks old now. I've been holding it in reserve. It's from Kate Bolingaro and Shelley Hagan of Bloomberg. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau may struggle to sell his ambitious new immigration plan to Canadians, a new survey shows. Only 17% of respondents say the country should accept more immigrants in 2021 than it did last year, according to a Nanos Research Group poll conducted for Bloomberg News. That suggests most Canadians are less than enthusiastic about aggressive new targets announced last week. Trudeau hopes to attract 401,000 newcomers this year, 60,000 more than in 2019. The target would rise by 10,000 in each subsequent year, bringing it to 421,000 in 2023. That is significantly more than 1% of the entire population. And, we've wrecked the economy, so let's bring in more foreigners, the vast majority of whom speak neither English nor French, and a very large proportion have no education to speak of, and a very large proportion as well is exceedingly low IQs. An open door policy is the central tenet of the Liberal government's long-term growth agenda. Well, it will raise the GDP, no question about that, but how about per capita GDP? They never talk about that, do they? With the economy recovering from the damage wrought by COVID-19, the damage was not wrought by COVID-19. It was wrought by politicians who cravenly surrendered their responsibilities and allowed themselves to be led around the nose by latrine wallahs. We're facing 9 to 10% unemployment. More than 1 million Canadians are out of work. Conservative lawmaker Raquel Dancho said in an interview, adding that affordable housing is also scarce. Where are these folks going to work? Where are these folks going to live? Folks. We're all so folksy now. I mean, Pat Buchanan has always said folks, but, he grew up in Washington, D.C., which is the South, y'all. Closed borders and pandemic-related travel restrictions have slowed immigration this year. Oh, dear. And the country is on pace to meet only 60% of its 2020 target of 341,000 permanent residents. Immigration Minister Marco Mendocino argues increasing the number of permanent residents will support the economy's recovery from COVID-19 and help fill vacancies in essential work like healthcare. Oh, yes, we need people, we need doctors, we need nurses, we need the people, we need orderlies, porters, and all that. And these jobs pay a lot of money, but we can't get Canadians to do that, really? Do you seriously expect us to believe that? Mendocino is also hoping to draw on the more than 1 million foreign students, temporary workers, and asylum seekers already in the country to achieve the increased targets. So Canada's a population of about 38 million people, and we have 1 million foreign students, temporary workers, and asylum seekers already in the country. Mendocino said, Canadians have a long, proud history of welcoming immigrants because we know immigration makes our country stronger, Mendocino said. Yeah, I'm just thinking about Dante's Inferno and his various levels of hell, and the circle, for those people who betray their country, betray their people. Let's move on to the book club now. And I'm going to be talking about a book by Miguel de Unamuno. And it was written in 1912 and is called either Tragic Sense of Life, that's the title of the English translation, or The Tragic Sense of Life. And in his introduction, Unamuno describes how he was fluent in English, but a friend of his, an English-speaking friend of his, did the translation. And Unamuno describes that the book was worked over in translation, and he said, in effect, that the English version of that is probably a better expression of my thought than the original Spanish version. Miguel de Unamuno y Hugo was born in 1864 and died in 1936. He was something of a Renaissance man, essayist, novelist, poet, playwright, philosopher, professor of Greek and classics, and rector at the University of Salamanca. He was born in Bilbao in the Basque Country, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. He was a giant in the Spain of the early 20th century. And of course, the history of Spain was exceedingly tumultuous, that he was banished from his university by Primo de Rivera, the dictator of Spain. Interesting fellow. He's the fellow who allowed Jews to return to Spain. They had been kicked out in 1492 and in 1924. You just have to switch the numbers around. The Jews were allowed to return. I don't know whether this is an apocryphal story, but I find it delightful that Miguel Primo de Rivera said of his early life, and you'll have to excuse the profanity, but the joke doesn't work without it. He said after he'd become dictator of Spain, of his youth, "If I knew then where I would be now, I would have done more studying and less fucking." So Unamuno went into exile off the coast in the Canary Islands, and he returned. He was gravely conflicted during the Spanish Civil War because he was one of those people, George Bernanos was another, who understood the terrible atrocities committed by the Republicans, but was not willing to let the nationalists off for the atrocities that they committed. The fascinating story about him, which I just heard about recently, when I was talking, when I was discussing on the book club Peter Kemp's book, his memoir of his experiences fighting for the nationalists in the Spanish Civil War, Mine Were of Trouble, that he describes the terrifying General Jose Milan Astre with his motto, "Viva la muerte," long live death. There's a story that anyone who's familiar with this period knows, and I'll just read from Wikipedia. On the 12th of October 1936, the Spanish Civil War had been underway for just under 3 months. The celebration of Columbus Day had brought together a politically diverse crowd at the University of Salamanca, including Enrique Pla y Daniel, the Archbishop of Salamanca, and Carmen Polo Martinez Valdez, the wife of Franco, Falangist General Jose Milan Astre, and Unamuno himself. Unamuno had supported Franco's uprising because he believed it necessary to bring order to the anarchy created by the Popular Front, and that day he was representing General Franco in the event. By then, the Republican government had removed Unamuno from his perpetual rectory at the Salamanca University, and the rebel government had restored him. There are different versions of the account. According to the British historian Hugh Thomas in his magnum opus, The Spanish Civil War, the evening began with an impassioned speech by the Falangist writer Jose Maria Peman. After this, Professor Francisco Maldonado decried Catalonia and the Basque Country as cancers on the body of the nation, adding that fascism, the healer of Spain, will know how to exterminate them, cutting into the live flesh like a determined surgeon free from false sentimentalism. From somewhere in the auditorium, someone cried out the motto, "Viva la muerte." As was his habit, Milan Astre responded with "España." The crowd replied with "Una." He repeated "España." The crowd then replied "Grande." A third time, Milan Astre shouted "España." The crowd responded "Libre." This, Spain, one, great, and free, was a common Falangist cheer and would become a Francoist motto thereafter. Later, a group of uniformed Falangists entered, saluting the portrait of Franco that hung on the wall. Unamuno, who was presiding over the meeting, rose up slowly and addressed the crowd. "You are waiting for my words. You know me well, and you know I cannot remain silent for long. Sometimes to remain silent is to lie, since silence can be interpreted as assent. I want to comment on the so-called speech of Professor Maldonado, who is with us here. I will ignore the personal offense to the Basques and Catalans. I myself, as you know, was born in Bilbao. The bishop, Unamuno, gestured to the Archbishop of Salamanca, whether you like it or not, is Catalan, born in Barcelona. But now I have heard this insensitive and necrophilous oath, Viva la muerte, and I, having spent my life writing paradoxes that have provoked the ire of those who do not understand what I have written, and being an expert in this matter, find this ridiculous paradox repellent. General Milan Estre is a cripple. There is no need for us to say this with whispered tones. He is a war cripple. So was Cervantes. But unfortunately, Spain today has too many cripples. And if God does not help us, soon it will have very many more. It torments me to think that General Milan Estre could dictate the norms of the psychology of the masses. A cripple who lacks the spiritual greatness of Cervantes hopes to find relief by adding to the number of cripples around him. Pretty devastating, right? Milan Estre responded, according to Thomas, death to intelligence, long live death, provoking applause from the phalangists. Peman, in an effort to calm the crowd, exclaimed, no, long live intelligence, death to the bad intellectuals. Unamuno continued, this is the temple of intelligence, and I am its high priest. You are profaning its sacred domain. You will win because you have enough brute force, but you will not convince. In order to convince, it is necessary to persuade, and to persuade, you will need something that you lack, reason and right in this struggle. I see it as useless to ask you to think of Spain. I have spoken. Milan Estre, controlling himself, shouted, take the lady's arm. Unamuno took Carmen Polo by the arm and left under her protection. But then, in 2018, the details of Unamuno's speech were disputed by the historian Severiano Delgado, who argued that the account in a 1941 article by Luis Gabriel Portillo, who was not present at Salamanca, in the British magazine Horizon, may not have been an accurate representation of events. Severiano Delgado, a historian and librarian at the University of Salamanca, asserts that Unamuno's words were put in his mouth by Luis Portillo in 1941, possibly with some help by George Orwell, in a piece in the literary magazine Horizon entitled Unamuno's Last Lecture. Portillo had not witnessed the event. Delgado's book, titled Archaeology of a Myth, the act of October 12, 1936, in the auditorium of the University of Salamanca, shows how the propaganda myth arose regarding the confrontation that took place that day between Miguel de Unamuno and the General Milan Estre. Delgado agrees that it was a very fierce and violent verbal confrontation between Unamuno and Milan Estre definitely occurred, which led to Unamuno being removed from his rectorship. But he thinks that the famous speech attributed to Unamuno was invented and written by Luis Portillo. Delgado says what Portillo did was to come up with a kind of liturgical drama where you have an angel and a devil confronting one another. What he wanted to do above all was to symbolize evil, fascism, militarism, brutality through Milan Estre, and set it against the democratic values of the Republicans, liberalism and goodness represented by Unamuno. Portillo had no intention of misleading anyone. It was simply a literary evocation. Unamuno took the floor not to confront Milan Estre, but to answer a previous speech by Professor of Literature Francisco Maldonado, who had identified Catalonia and the Basque Country with the anti-Spain. Unamuno himself was Basque and was revolted with Maldonado's speech, but when addressing the audience, he used the example of what happened with Jose Rizal, a Filipino nationalist and polymath during the tail end of the Spanish colonial period of the Philippines, executed by the Spanish colonial government for the crime of rebellion after the Philippine Revolution. Milan Estre had fought in the Philippines, and it was the reference to Jose Rizal that annoyed Milan Estre, who shouted, "The traitoring intellectuals die." As proof that the incident was nothing more than a crossroads of hard words, the photograph reproduced on the cover of his book shows Milan Estre and Miguel de Unamuno calmly saying goodbye in the presence of Bishop Pla, with no tension between them. The photo was discovered in 2018 in the National Library and was part of the chronicle of the act that the newspaper, The Advancement of Salamanca, published the following day, the 13th of October, 1936. According to Delgado, Portillo's account of the speech became famous when a then very young British historian, Hugh Thomas, 30 at the time, came across it in a Horizon anthology while researching his seminal book, The Spanish Civil War, and mistakenly took it as a primary source. I tell this story at length for two reasons. One, to remind you, facts. These facts are disputed. We have possession of the facts. Do you? Do you know that they are the facts? How do you know that they are the facts? Because authority figures say they are the facts. I mentioned this story as well to indicate the times in which Unamuno lived in, and that he was he was Basque. He was from Bilbao. There is a really remarkable introduction to this book by Salvador de Madariaga, who is one of the great Spaniards of the 20th century. Clearly, he is an admirer of Unamuno, but he takes issue with him as a Basque, that the Basques are very manly men, very manly. He says, Unamuno himself is ever-changing, a talker, as all good Spaniards are nowadays, but a talker in earnest and with his heart in it. He is varied like the subjects of his conversation, and still more like the passions which they awaken him. And here I find an unsought reason in intellectual support of that intuitional observation which I noted down in starting, that Unamuno resembles the Welsh, in that he is not ashamed of showing his passions, a thing which he has often to do, for he is very much alive and feels therefore plenty of them. But a word of caution may here be necessary, since that term passion, having been diminished, that is made meaner by the world, an erroneous impression might be conveyed by what proceeds of the life and ways of Unamuno. So that it may not be superfluous to say that Don Miguel de Unamuno, as a professor of Greek in the University of Salamanca, an ex-rector of it, who left behind the reputation of being a strong ruler, a father of a numerous family, and a man who has sung the quiet and deep joys of married life with a restraint, vigor, and a nobility, which it would be difficult to match in any literature, yet a passionate man, or as he would perhaps prefer to say, therefore, a passionate man, but in a major, not a minor key of strong, not weak passions. I quite like that. A major, not a minor key. Unamuno seemed to, know everything about literature. He knew all manner of languages and kept up, as Madariaga tells us, with English literature. Let's see, here's another example. It was in his library at Salamanca that he once explained to an Englishman the meaning of a particular Scotticism in Robert Burns. And it was there that he congratulated another Englishman on his having read Rural Rides, the hallmark, he said, of the man of letters, who is no mere man of letters, but also a man. And this is the point of this introduction by Madariaga, that Unamuno can only be understood if one understands him to be a man of flesh and bone. That he was a exceedingly serious man. It was Unamuno himself who once said that the Basque is the alkaloid of the Spaniard. The saying is true so far as it goes, but it would be more accurate to say one of the alkaloids. It is probable that if the Spanish character were analyzed, always provided that the Mediterranean aspect of it be left aside as a thing apart, two main principles would be recognized in it, i.e. the Basque, richer in concentration, substance, strength, and the Andalusian, more given to observation, grace, form. The two types are to this day socially opposed. The Andalusian is a people which has lived down many civilizations and which even illiterate peasants possess a kind of innate education. The Basques are a primitive people of mountaineers and fishermen, in which even scholars have a peasant-like roughness, not unlike the roughness of Scotch tweeds or character. It is the even balancing of these two elements, the force of the northerner with the grace of the southerner, which gives the Castilian his admirable poise and explains the graceful virility of men such as Fray Louis de Leon and the feminine strength of women such as Queen Isabel and Saint Teresa. We are therefore led to expect in so forcible a representative of the Basque race as Unamuno the more substantial and earnest features of the Spanish spirit. He goes on to make an extraordinary comparison of Unamuno with the English poet Wordsworth, and that he sees a insufficiency, too much masculinity, which affects their work. And it is, I'll leave it to you. You can find this book for free on the internet. I'll leave it to you to go into more detail. He writes, Unamuno curiously resembles Wordsworth, whom, by the way, he's one of the few Spaniards to read and appreciate. Like him, Unamuno is an essentially purposeful and utilitarian mind. Of the two qualities which the work of art requires for its inception, earnestness and detachment, both Unamuno and Wordsworth possess the first, both are deficient in the second. Their interest in their respective leading thoughts, survival in the first, virtue in the second, is too direct, too pressing, to allow them the distance necessary for artistic work. Both are urged to work by a lofty utilitarianism, the search for God through the individual soul in Unamuno, the search for God through the social soul in Wordsworth, so that their thoughts and sensations are polarized and their spirit loses that impartial transparency for nature's lights, without which no great art is possible. Now that's what I call literary criticism. What is the tragic sense of life? Unamuno writes, all this talk of a man surviving in his children or in his works or in the universal consciousness is but vague verbiage, which satisfies only those who suffer from affective stupidity and who, for the rest, may be persons of a certain cerebral distinction. For it is possible to possess great talent, or what we call great talent, and yet be stupid as regards the feelings and even morally imbecile. There have been instances. These clever-witted, effectively stupid persons are wont to say that it is useless to seek to delve in the unknowable or to kick against the pricks. And as if one should say to a man whose leg has had to be amputated that it does not help him at all to think about it. And we all lack something. Only some of us feel the lack and others do not. Or they pretend not to feel the lack and they are hypocrites. A pedant who beheld Solon weeping for the death of his son said to him, why do you weep thus, if weeping avails nothing? And the sage answered him, precisely for that reason, because it does not avail. It is manifest that weeping avails something, even if only the alleviation of distress. But the deep sense of Solon's reply to the impertinent questioner is plainly seen, and I am convinced that we should solve many things if we all went out into the streets and uncovered our griefs, which perhaps would prove to be but one sole common grief, and join together in beweeping them and crying aloud to the heavens and calling upon God. And this, even though God should hear us not, but he would hear us. The chief sanctity of a temple is that it is a place to which men go to weep in common. A miserere sung in common by a multitude tormented by destiny has as much value as a philosophy. It is not enough to cure the plague. We must learn to weep for it. Yes, we must learn to weep. Perhaps that is the supreme wisdom. Why? Asked Solon. There's something which, for lack of a better name, we call the tragic sense of life, which carries with it a whole conception of life itself and of the universe, a whole philosophy more or less formulated, more or less conscious. And the sense may be possessed and is possessed not only by individual men, but by whole peoples. And this sense does not so much flow from ideas as determine them, even though afterwards, as is manifest, these ideas react upon it and confirm it. Sometimes it may originate in a chance illness, dyspepsia, for example, but at other times it is constitutional. And it is useless to speak, as we shall see, of men who are healthy and men who are not healthy. Apart from the fact that there is no normal standard of health, nobody has proved that man is necessarily cheerful by nature. And further, man, by the very fact of being man, of possessing consciousness, is, in comparison with the ass or the crab, a diseased animal. Consciousness is a disease. Among men of flesh and bone, there have been many typical examples of those who possess this tragic sense of life. I recall now Marcus Aurelius, St. Augustine, Pascal, Rousseau, René, Obermann, Thomson, Leopardi, Vigny, Lenau, Kleist, Emile, Quental, Kierkegaard, men burdened with wisdom rather than with knowledge. And there are, I believe, peoples who possess this tragic sense of life also. It is to this that we must now turn our attention, beginning with this matter of health and disease. Unamuno expresses in this book a irritation, in fact, a disgust with philosophers who do not deal with the question of man or the problem of man, if you will. And, when I found out, when was this? 20 years ago, that the head of the philosophy department at the University of British Columbia, where my girlfriend at the time was a graduate student, that he was an expert in the philosophy of color. And what? I thought, and I did some research. Wow, apparently philosophy of color is a very big thing in the philosophy world these days. No, but Unamuno deals with the problem of being a man and what is man's purpose. This is the question of his book. And I could talk for a long time. I'll just say that this is one of the books which has most impressed me of all the books I have ever read. Because the tragic sense of man, well, we are born. We do not choose to be born. We do not choose who our parents are. We do not choose what the circumstances are. We do not choose our face or our name or our intelligence. And we are all doomed to die. That is the tragic sense of life. And of course, this is what philosophers should concern themselves with. But there have been many who have not, and today philosophy seems to be become totally abstract and useless. Unamuno was, to repeat Madariaga, a man of flesh and bone, and his book exemplifies this in a thrilling and profound way. Let's go back to the chat. What does it say? The gauchos of Canaria are definitely white. Gauchos of Canaria are definitely white. It's the science of color anti-prismatic, says Brandon Smith. Mediahead says Berbers are considered Caucasian. These numbers have been dwindling because of the Muslim invasions. Quachalango says, is dyspepsia not constitutional? I'd have to think about that. I mean, the word dyspepsia is used in several ways, is it not? Bob Paxson says consciousness is a burden. It is a burden. There's no question about that. Media hits again. Is KMG having a Kafka-like moment with his bright interrogation light? Does that make any difference? It's too late to change the lighting. The show's over. The show's over. Your mama says effective stupidity. Nowadays, they would call that autism. Many Spanish redheads in small town New Mexico, says Quacha Longo. Reading this book, and especially the introduction by Madariaga, one is reminded of just how various Spain is. And, there's been, ETA terrorists. The separatism movement in Catalonia is exceedingly strong. And Franco pursued a policy of unification which the Celtic people regard as an attempt of genocide. Actually, will Spain stick together? Will it remain one country? I don't know. I don't know that I would bet on it. Hikma Warrior says Franco's entry into Madrid with the Moroccan Guard was awesome. Yo Mama says Basques are descended from Cro-Magnons. Okay. Media hits back during the Civil War. Moors had to fight with Franco. Hikma Warrior talks about the concierto for Aranjuez. I forget. Double-barreled composer. I can't remember it. I know it's extraordinarily popular. Anyway, that is the show for tonight and the show for this week. What is coming up? What's coming up on the show, culture-wise? Theater Thursday next week, a movie about a serial killer. Yes, the famed Hannibal Lecter, performed by Brian Cox, whose performance I consider to be much more subtle than Tony Hopkins. It's really quite brilliant. I love Brian Cox. This is Manhunter by Michael Mann from 1986. And then I have 3 films which are Christmas or New Year's related. December 17th, John Ford's 3 Godfathers from 1948, starring John Wayne. On December 24th, Christian Carrion's Joyeux Noël from 2005, and one of my very favorite films from one of my most beloved filmmakers on December 31st, Menuit chez Maud, My Night at Maud's by Eric Romer from 1969. And on the book club next week, I am going to discuss a series of comedy books about a terrible time in human history. They are the books Nord, Castle to Castle, and Rigadoon by Louis Ferdinand Céline, who was an inveterate humorist. His brand of humor, it destroyed his life, actually. He just couldn't stop telling jokes. On December 18th, I'm going to discuss the collected poetry of my favorite poet, the South African Roy Campbell. On December 25th, which is Christmas Day, something a little different, I'm going to read in its entirety Leo Tolstoy's magnificent short story, What Men Live By. And then the rest of the show, we'll do something else. And on January the 1st, I'm going to talk about a book which has influenced me a great deal. One of the books which has influenced me the greatest. It is by Richard Weaver and is called Ideas Have Consequences. I'll be back on the air Monday at 4 p.m. Pacific time, 7 p.m. Eastern. If you like the show or any part of it, I'd appreciate it if you click on the like button and subscribe to my YouTube channel if you've not done so already. If you would like to make a donation to this live stream, which would be exceedingly appreciated now, as it appears I'm going to have to clear out by the end of the month. My PayPal account is linked to kevin_grace@hotmail.com. Once again, kevin_grace@hotmail.com. If you are Canadian, you can send a donation to this live stream directly via Interact to kevingrace@shaw.ca. And as always, I leave you with this. In these days of social atomization and societal civilizational, rather, collapse, I do dearly wish that you, my dear viewers and listeners, managed to find a genuine human connection in order to ease the burden. Good night.